So how to structure Java EE Microservices is one of the most frequent questions I get after a while from people who are actually using Java EE. It was funny feedback. People came to me and said, what do you show? What is really Java EE? It's like, yeah, this is what I'm doing the whole time. It's like, yeah, because I really hated in the past Java EE. It's like, what you should hate is not Java EE, but some architects which force developers for crazy things, right? So now let's talk about pragmatic. What means pragmatic? Productive structuring of Java EE applications. And so I'm still Adam Bean. I'm working with Java since 1995. Since 1997, I'm a freelancer. I never worked for any large company. I really like Sun and IBM at the beginning. So I had always IBM ThinkPad. I really liked the machine. After it broke, and then I had to buy Apple because it was impossible to restore it from backup. And IBM was AlphaWorks and DeveloperWorks back then, huge thing. And Oracle, I have no opinion. The Oracle is just there, right? So yeah, this is what about me, freelancer. And when I was asked what I'm actually doing, I try to avoid conferences. What I'm doing, I spend my time in projects, and my projects are usually code reviews, task forces, startup help. So they say, okay, we would like to start with that. What should we do? Concrete questions, something like this. Yeah, this is what I'm doing. If project doing well, I'm usually not asked for help. So what I also always what I see in conjunction with Java EE are just problems, right? If something works well, I never see this. So, and I really have fun, still fun with that. And my goal would be to be 80 and still hacking like James Gosling. This would be ultimate goal. So I will try to achieve that. Instead of doing Sudoku as a manager, I would rather hack and in the freelance and in my free time do something else. Now, you heard about EXFM is a podcast. There are no ads, nothing. I just like to ask interesting people like Emily, for instance, or Mike Milinkovic, or Cameron Purdy was the last interviewee. Cameron was the how it's called vice president of Java development at Oracle, and asked him how it actually was. So this was the last one. So web standards, web components, effective web training. There are online courses, and in November I have some courses on Airport Munich, and December as well. But let's start about the structure. So first, or next, if you have application server, and I'm assuming you have something like application server because you have Java EE, so in the title, we get something for free. What you already saw is what we get is for instance, right now, transactions, concurrency. With microprofile, we get fault tolerance, we get authentication, authorization, SSO, and so forth. And this is nothing new. It is available for, I would say, at least 2 years, if not more. And with OpenShift or cloud-like environment, what you get is a log aggregation. For instance, in an OpenShift project, we just log into system.println without any framework, and OpenShift aggregates the logs, and we search. It can search this in Kibana. What you only need is a JSON appender. And so what it basically means is Java EE is the most boring platform on earth. There is from day one you have to focus on business logic, and this is the true problem of that. So I had already chats with developers that say there is no excitement. So at the day one, everything is set up, and now we have to move forwards business logic. But if they get something interesting, for instance, in one startup last week, they asked me, the very first question is, what is my opinion about Kafka? I had no idea what they're building, but they wanted to have Kafka. And then it turned out they don't even have messages, so there was actually no way to introduce Kafka. But we could, so if you like, we could send emails via Kafka, or we can integrate it somehow. But I don't see, the use case for that. And they were a little bit disappointed that I didn't, help them with Kafka. But even Kafka is really easy to integrate with Java EE. There are already integration. It is CDI is really easy. Okay, so now if we have everything, we have to focus on business logic. Now, what we also know, microservices. With microservices, we know a lot. What microservices mean is we have one process, which is the application runs in exactly one process, and the services are exposed through a lightweight protocol. So this is the definition from Martin Fowler. There are other definitions, but this is the one with that everything started. So what means is no one will actually know that we are running Java inside a war. Agreed? So if the only endpoint is lightweight, usually HTTP, JSON, or WebSocket protocol, no one should actually know that Java is running inside somewhere, inside our microservice. Agreed? So one-to-one relation, what it means is shared deployments are forbidden. One application server, one war, and at most one sidecar war for admins, maintenance, or something like this. So we have one-to-one relation, exactly what I did before during the keynote. One process, one war. Done. Agreed? So what we learned, we have one black box with one endpoint in one process, running usually in a kind of container. I would say 99.9% is Docker, unfortunately. And the most popular schedulers on Earth are Kubernetes. Unfortunately, why? Because Microsoft, Oracle, Red Hat, everyone contributes to Kubernetes right now. And this is no way out, I would say. So Kubernetes just rules the world. You get Kubernetes on Amazon, Kubernetes on Cloud Foundry, and even on IBM Cloud, I guess, right? Of course. And everywhere you get Kubernetes. So this is what you have to know. So if we know that Docker, we know about the layering, immutable images. So what it means is, usually in projects, one business department or operation department cares about the image. So they build an operating system which is patched. If you have Red Hat, you get RHEL, or SUSE in Germany, still available. And they use the they decide what goes into the operating system, which Java version, SSL certificates. Then usually we get the image, and the next layer will be configured OpenLiberty, Payara, or Whitefly. And the last image is what I did today is just the war. So we know that, so we have to use it. Now in larger projects, Docker registry can be used. What usually my clients are using is Nexus, because they can push Nexus 3 supports out-of-the-box Docker registries, and they would like to have everything revisioned and versioned in a central place. And this is backup, so everything is actually as it was before in Nexus. The only difference is, or Artifactory, the same. The only difference is that we have everything right now, from operating system to the war. And in Nexus before, we only had the war, and the war without the application server, you couldn't start it. So far about operations. Agreed? Now, what we also know, our application is always remote, so we need actually monitoring, but this is always ignored. So I have to admit, in most of the projects are reviewed, so observability or monitoring are just not there. So it's you cannot tell, if you ask how many users are logged in, what the application server is doing, they have no idea. What they can tell me, as I said, the heap size or CPU utilization, which I really don't care. Okay? So I would start with higher level monitoring. It's the first important thing. In my eyes, it should go into use cases, user stories, whoever is responsible for that. And this is the problem probably from Scrum and Agile, because there is no one who cares about monitoring, usually. Agreed? Agreed. You have to. Otherwise, someone will tell, okay, we always monitored everything, but it's not the case. Now, we have that. What we know right now is our war is completely encapsulated. So it means we got the first time in the history of Java through modules. For me, one war is one module. Done. And one war is completely independent from the other war. Done. What it means is it kills all the ideas of shared jars. Agreed? So whatever you need is in Java, and on application server you get more as you can. So you get microprofile, everything. So no shared jars. Why not shared jars? Because if the shared jar changes, no one knows what should happen. In one project they tried to convince me we write tests and we can ensure that everything is compatible. My answer was forget it. Never saw this. Agreed? So what it means is in microservices the only thing which works is copy and paste. Tell it as it is. Copy and paste is the best practice in microservices, and on the NoSQL databases not that different. Relational databases were normalized like crazy, and NoSQL databases are more like put whatever you can in one document. A very similar strategy. Is it bad? No, it's just different, completely different. What I'm telling you, you should be just consequent. You are doing. It's not like you know, microservices which are jars. And I told the story before in one project I reviewed that they created 3 wars microservices with 120 Maven modules, own modules. So 120. No one could tell me why, but they were very proud of that. And now it comes. All the 120 Maven modules plus the wars had exactly the same version. So what it means, it didn't make any sense, because on each change they built everything and ship it in production. So this is actually really nice, but I mean, you cannot even explain it to no one what you are doing here, right? Except someone really likes modules in your project, or you are paid per module or whatever, right? So what means is, in my projects, modules, jars are absolutely forbidden. You get your war, stick with your war, no one cares about modules. Modules are only allowed if they are reasonable. And what could be a reasonable module? Usually they are business-driven modules, like abstraction from payment API, or Watson abstraction of Watson, or MQTT, or whatever. But then we differentiate, is this API part of the platform? Then we can put it in Docker image that's equal for everyone, like for instance Java EE 8 and Microprofile. Both versions, we stick with the version for I don't know how long, but at least 1 year, and then we upgrade everything. So you can extend the platform and say we don't only have, you know, Microprofile 2 and Java EE 8, but we also get, let's say, Watson 2.0 because we have to talk to Watson, and PayPal API 3.0 because this is what we get here. But with the PayPal and payment APIs, for instance, it would be, I think, a better idea to introduce another microservice and wrap the PayPal API. Okay? So what are other classic jars which can be shared? Yeah, POI, Apache POI. This is pure object interface. If you would like to access Word or Excel, no one will create it in a project. So this is obvious. So everyone will say we need it. So what I see the newest trend is to have, you know, how is Jakarta Commons length, to have nice set to string and equals on, for instance, JP entities, which is never called, so the best. Okay, or how it's called, the code generator, Lombok is other trend. Everyone would like to have DTOs, and they find out getters and setters are boring, so let's introduce Lombok to generate getters and setters. So okay, all don't write DTOs. So, questions? So we the first time in Java history, we have the super modules. They work way better than OSGI because we can redeploy a war quickly, and we are sure there are no binary dependencies to other wars. Now, how many wars should I have? You should start with 1 war. I can only tell you Java EE is very small. If you are reasonable, start with a monolith, and constantly search for business reasons to introduce another war, and never start with wars because you can. So everyone can create 120 modules, but it is way harder to write simple code in 1 war which is small. So simplicity rules. Agreed? I think we covered a lot about operations and modularization and stuff like that. And this is basically what we are doing. Next week, I also advise another startup, and they wanted to start with modules. They have to go production next year, early next year. So, okay, start with 1 microlith, a small war, no dependencies, go fast, and after going live, you can see whether there is some need to split it. And what they also told me, yeah, but we would like to reuse it something. So, and I would say you at the beginning of the project, forget about reuse. It actually never happens. So we are dreaming about reuse for 25 years, and sometimes at conferences you hear about reuse, but this is obvious, right? Like someone managed, you know, they have some, I don't know, Bundesbank prints money, and they have 1 printing machine, so they have 1 service which has to be called in order to print money. It's like, okay, this is enforcing reuse, right? But no one will reuse your logger or your cache or your logging framework. This is what I can tell you. Why not? Because who is actually a developer here? Everyone, right? So if you start developing, I don't think you search in the whole enterprise repository whether something could be reused, right? If you can, you write your own class. This is what I'm doing, I have to admit. It's not like I'm scanning my whole clients, you know, my insurance company, whether this could be a class which is reusable. If this doesn't happen, and we are actually people who building the stuff, forget it. So there is no reuse. Build whatever you can as fast as simple as possible, and then go in production. And if there is something to reuse, it is obvious. Like insurance companies would like to have common computations for insurances, because otherwise it will be dangerous when every room computes the life insurance a little bit differently. Okay? But this is our obvious stuff. Okay? Agreed? Next, abstractions. The next thing is what happens. I don't know why, because this is something to go to be warm. The entity manager is going to be wrapped in a repository, because DAOs are out of fashion, so they are renowned to the repository. And so because entity manager, this is, I have to be careful, this is a Dolby Digital, yeah? Because the entity manager is already a domain store, a very good repository, there is nothing left to do. So what people are doing, just wrapping all the methods, and they rename some things. For instance, last week I saw merge was renamed to edit, to obfuscate things a little bit. All other methods were as they are. So first, such things are forbidden. In my eyes, it's a defect. Someone will have to maintain this DAO repository or whatever, and I guarantee you, you won't manage to document with JavaDoc your DAO better than entity manager is already documented. Forget it. So in code reviews, I search for abstract classes interfaces. In Java EE context, always suspicious. If I see interfaces, all the implementations are called impulse, which is crazy, because there will be never a second, right? If there's one impl, how we call a second impl 2 or 1, or then now there's where the discussion starts. In one project, they didn't use impl, and they renamed interfaces to I interface, which doesn't solve the problem. Okay, so implementations, Java classes are only allowed if you have the strategy patterns or two. And so we talk about that. All the Gang of 4 patterns are actually were killed by CDI, so there is no point of doing factories. If I find a factory, usually a defect, because at inject is your factory, and then produces even better factory. And all factories, abstract factories and abstract factories, they were nice and kept us warm, but there is actually no place in it in Java EE. You have other framework probably in Java, just talking about Java EE. Agreed? Decorators, dead. Why? We have interceptors and decorators. You cannot decorate more than this, and always suspicious that there is something to decorate. Therefore, I think no one talks about AOP anymore. This was the crazy stuff, AOP. You know, we solve all the problems. AOP alliance, whatever, now is dead. I don't know. No one talks about AOP. I don't know whether there's one talk here about aspect-oriented programming. And the funniest stuff is, we had AOP from the beginning in Java EE, but we didn't know this because AOP and EJBs were started the same year. So the AOP name was not part of Java EE, never was, because it started at the same time, so it was not known. But we have AOP. So now the infrastructure. What it means, interface are not there, abstracted classes are dead, Gang of 4 patterns, unusual decorators, adapters, factories. Builders could be interesting, because the whole API, usually JAX-ORS and so forth, is used is implemented with builders, but this is not that common that they will start with a builder. So you will have to reason for that. Okay, what it means in practice, the simplest possible microservice are 3 classes: JAX-ORS resource, a kind of facade with injected entity manager, and 1 JPA entity. This is the best practice for simplest possible JAX-ORS based microservice which accesses a database. Any other class is a defect. Okay? Never saw this. If an external consulting company starts a project, you get at least 30 classes. Because they get the idea, we have an entity, abstract entity, identifiable entity, and just the over interface is like get something, and just to have something to do, right? Okay, now exceptions. The next thing. Exceptions hierarchies were extremely important. Why? Because we had RMI and CORBA, and exceptions were for decoupling. So we have to be careful about the cause. If we put too much into exceptions, the client couldn't deserialize the exception, for instance. So it was extremely important to deal well with exceptions. Now, in microservices, no one ever will see your exceptions. It's impossible to see. If someone will see your exceptions outside, it's a complete defect. So security department will complain, Angular people will always complain, and so forth, right? So this is like it is. So so what it means is, you can create your exceptions, but you have to have a reason for that. And I tell you what I see is they create exceptions, just hierarchy, technical exception, a business exception, which is a good idea first, and then subclasses. And then if such an exception is thrown, you will see on the client side error 500, because the application server say, okay, I don't know what to do with the exception. And then they use an exception mapper, which decrypts the exception hierarchy and creates HTTP status code. Okay, so this is what I see in projects. And what you could do instead, for instance, you could do something like this. So I have my JCON interface, hopefully it's still running. And if I would throw here an exception, I could, for instance, do this, throw new illegal state exception. This is what I did. New web application exception first. And this web application exception can have, for instance, a message, no good morning. But just for fun, I can say this is actually not an error. And if I will start this, I don't know, it's not deployed. It's JCON, thank you. .8080, no good morning. So again, build that. The problem in the break, I deleted the whole cloud, and I'm not sure what is actually running now. Okay, now we see that we do see anything, and what I will have to do to say curl -I this, and you see 200. And the message disappeared, but this is 200. So if I change that to, let's say, 204, I see 204. So first, this is the easiest possible way. So illegal state exceptions are forbidden. This is what you can do. Now you can say, you are so smart, right? But what you can do, what if this is my heavy stuff? And the heavy stuff, of course, are stateless EGBs. They are told to be very expensive heavyweight, which turns out it isn't. There is a guy from IBM, Samo Lisov. You know him, Emily? This is an interesting person. Samo Lisov, EGB. He actually watched one of my test courses, and I compared the performance of EGBs and CDI, and EGBs won. They were faster, and I couldn't believe it. And he formalized the test and repeated the test on different machines on clusters. And what he found out is that EGB are the fastest, and it wins everything. Now the question is, how is it possible? You're also using EGB in your project, right, Tobias? Yeah. He will come on interview soon. He builds an IoT stuff with Java EE. And the question is how it's possible, because and the reason for that is because of pooling, but not the pooling we know with new and garbage collector. You have to imagine the following: in a microservice, I get lots of injected stuff. With EGBs, the stuff is injected only once. With request scope CDI on every request. And how injection works? It works with reflection. And reflection is the still smallest operation in Java. So per accident, stateless are the fastest technology right now because they are pooled with dependency injection. But you shouldn't care about this. This is like just, I think it was 19% different, but this is like, EGB calls take 1 millisecond, and this would be 0.8 millisecond. So I would say no one calls me because the application is too slow of 0.2 milliseconds, right? And if you have a database, forget about that. But this is the interesting part, right? So therefore, people ask me, why are not using CDI? And the question is why. The application server comes with EGBs and CDI. I just take EGB as the boundary and CDI in the backend. It's perfect. Okay, if you don't believe me, go to Samo Lisov IBM. I just recorded a screencast and compared both, and I said CDI is faster, and he did research, right, with IBM mainframes or whatever. So it's a really interesting guy here. Now, stateless, heavy stuff. If I throw the exception here, good morning, and do, let's say, throw in new coolest thing I saw is in a project they walk away from EJBs and they created own stuff, and then I remeasured both, and their own stuff was 20% slower, but I was not allowed to tell it because it was like politically incorrect. So now I only tell it on conferences, never in the project. So they have illegal state exception, and this is too heavy and boring. So right. So and if I call it from here. Heavy stuff, thank you. It's really hard to hack stuff without, I'm sitting usually, so this is unusual position, and it impacts my productivity. So, return. So, if I do this, this surprises me. We should see an ugly exception, so that their EGBs are better than thought. This is a ping resource, so I do this stateless. Yeah. But still, you should see a stack trace from hell, which you don't see right now. I think this is newer Payara, is a little bit, this is a pity. Yeah. What you should see, usually, you know these stack traces from application servers are huge stack traces, and in the end you will see something goes wrong. The exceptions are not that clean as here. Just telling you. So, and what's the problem? So the problem is, if you do this, the illegal state exception in an EJB has to be wrapped in an EJB exception, and then you get the stack trace. And then everything has to be unwrapped in exception mapper. This is how this spec works. So therefore, it is better to introduce your own exception. And I'll show you a trick. So if you do this, good morning, no good morning exception. Now this exception, the first trick is, there is an annotation called application exception. And I can say rollback true or false is the first idea. So I can specify whether transaction has to be rollbacked oder nicht or not. Extends web application exception. And now I can say I'm a microservice, so I know what I'm doing. So I just allow this. And here I can say response status. Let's say 204 for fun. Header cause, yeah, cause message build. So, and the cool story is, thank you. You see, stupid Java. With JavaScript, it wouldn't happen, right? So it would. Yeah, I wouldn't get any compile errors. So now I created my own exception, which maps itself. I don't need any mapper. And of course, architects tell me you are crazy. Now everything is depending on JAX-ORS. It's like we are a microservice. Everything is depending on JAX-ORS. It's like it is, yeah. And the cool story is if I run it now, the exception should be prettier, which it already is, but this is really not usual. So I would just completely compile that. What I think, no good morning, You see, new no good morning exception. Wrong place, but curl 204 no content, and I'm just, it could be still the old one, because I would expect to have the message in the header, right? Yeah, the point is I would just expect the header, or I don't see this localhost 8080 header cause. I would expect the cause in curl, and let's do 503. It means try later. True, doesn't matter. We don't have transactions now. Service not available, so it works. What I'm missing here is connection close is something, the cause. So you see cause somewhere? I would expect the cause, but I can see I can pass the exceptions. And if you do this, you don't need your own exception mappers. So you can dedicate in place, if you define your own exceptions, you can say, okay, in this case, I'm throwing this error with this additional message. And then the code is more or less beautiful. There are not stupid exception hierarchies, and then exception mappers, which has to know which exceptions to expect and map them back and forth. Okay? What didn't work in the presentation here, usually you would see a huge stack trace, which was way too nice here. You never get, just nice EGB exceptions. You should get exception from hell, stack trace from hell, and with that, it is way nicer. Any questions about that? No. Then let's talk about structure, and then I will introduce the BCE pattern. And so the question is, what do you do in how to package your application? For me, Java packages are very, very important. And I don't know, 10 years ago, I've wrote a book in German, like J2E patterns or Java EE patterns, something like this. And I introduced my own names, how to structure the applications. I remember facade, service, domain, or something like this. And the problem was I had to explain in every project why I use service and not endpoint. And domain should be better, entities and whatever. So what I would like to tell you is it's a really bad idea to invent names. Everyone would like to talk about names. And there's even a principle with the bike shed principle, is where in nuclear reactor in USA, the most expensive decision was the color of the carpet in the entry room, because everyone wanted to change the color, but no one questioned the pressure in the reactor, whatever, because no one had idea, just few engineers. But everyone could contribute the knowledge, about the carpet color. And the same was in my projects with naming. It was terrible. So then I had to say, I have to find something where there is no discussion. This is requirements are a well-known person writes a book, so there should be a book, and there should be the tools should be able to draw it somewhere, because back then everyone wanted to draw diagrams. So now the book, Object-Oriented Software Engineering, a use case-driven approach from, I always forget it, Ivar Jacobson, one of the guy who created UML, which means it is like, the guy of diagrams. So there's no question about that. So if you need to draw diagrams, you have to go to Ivar Jacobson or the others, right? So the cool question is, the cool story is the book is so old, so it's really hard to find it. So it means no one will actually read it, right? So I'm always right with the names, whatever it was. Just kidding. And the cool story is, these are the icons, boundary control entity, and you can draw them with every tool. With Visio, if you have in some museum rational rows, or OmniGraphel, or whatever. So you have just the diagrams. And what it means is the following, very basic and very simple idea, and it works well. And I have a chat with Tobias, and he told me they have exactly the same structure with different names. What do you use for names? API, then? API service model. So we change the names, but the structure is exactly identical. Now, the first. if you're building something for your client, it should add added value to your client. You say, yes, this is part of the agile, but if you look at the source code of projects, it is not always the case. So in my world means all the packages have to have business names. In Java EE, there is no excuse to introduce your own historics package because everything is already included in the platform. So it's absolutely forbidden. So from day one, you will have to find a name for this package. And let's say we're building here cinema software. It should be movie, I don't know, what it's called, watches, movie, coffee, shop, tickets. But what is absolutely forbidden, so the first one is util, of course, right? So util is like, I don't know what to do today, just start with the util. We can put everything there. So just take a look at in Java util is everything, from functional programming to collections, everything what the engineer said, okay, today another util. So of course, common is very suspicious. It means the people who say util is just too simple. We would like to be a little bit smarter, so let's go with common. Common, infrastructure, base, framework, whatever sounds nice, but has no added value is forbidden. So after code review, they will have to delete it. If I have the power, if I don't have the power, I just write delete it. Whether they delete or not depends on them. So then, the packages are on the same level. And in the top level, you could put classes, like for instance, this class here. JAX-RS configuration is on the top level. So what it means is this class is common for all components. And one such a package is components with one ping. And if this is a cinema, so we could, for instance, create here movies boundary, let's say. So and you get the movies boundary. And here I would expect in microservice to have a movies resource. And this is plural because of REST. Path movies. And I'm basically set, so with that. So what it means is, if I open a project, and this is a cinema project, I would expect only one, interesting, only one this ghost in my machine. So I would expect only one, only one movie, but only packages with business names. Movies, attendees, clients, invoices, contracts. So this is, and you, how to find a good name. Just listen to your business department and pick the essential entities or essential domain objects and just write down the substantive what the application is doing. And this is the entry point to packages. What's surprising, I coach some startups and all startups love it. They have no interest in infrastructure and they focus full on business logic and they do it. All enterprise projects don't like it. And the coolest feedback was external consulting companies say, it's impossible to do something like I'm proposing here because then the external partners will have to bother with business logic. And I say, but yeah, but they have to in one point. What they do is like, yeah, but later. Right now we can create the infrastructure and we create CRUD framework and report software. I was like, okay, I don't know. Also, cinema has to sell movies. If I cannot recognize movies in a cinema, something is wrong with the system. Agreed? Now, the packages, they follow one rule, and this is called maximal cohesion, minimal coupling. So stuff inside the package should be as similar as possible. So all the classes have to belong together. But one movie should avoid to talk with the tickets if it's not necessary. So if not necessary, it's allowed but not necessary. Now, what I absolutely allow is circular dependencies between the packages. And this is where, you know, most architects say, you are stupid. How you can tell it circular dependencies are really bad, but you get them. Why? If you have in a movie a reference to a ticket, and the ticket has a reference to a movie because there is a title here, so on entity level, which is not unusual to have cycle between two entities, you get a cycle between packages. Agreed? You have to. So this is like how cycles works, right? So this is bidirectional dependence. Yeah. So and then what I saw already, the architects have tools like JArchitect and Structure one-on-one, and they pool the entities outside the components because they try to avoid dependencies, cycles between packages, and they end up having one huge package called domain, entities, core, or whatever, And this looks like crazy inside. You know, everyone has circular dependencies with everyone else. But the components are empty, of course, because everyone was moved to the center package, but there are no circular dependencies. Now, if you think about this, who cares about circular dependencies inside microservices? Circular dependencies between microservices, different story. They could be avoided. But inside microservice, do whatever you can if the code is simple and you are productive. And if I ask them, why you so care about the circular dependencies? Who cares about that? They say, yeah, because one day we could split the packages to different microservices. Like, okay, then the circular dependency is the least problem I have, right? So I mean, who cares about that? So if you really have to split it, probably the database will become the problem, not your to-getters. Agreed? Why so silent? Yeah. You say no and whatever, no? So what I try to avoid, I call it bureaucratic design. And what bureaucratic design is, like DTOs, all DTOs, services, all services. And then you have hundreds of classes in one package. And if you add a new feature, you will have to go to 3, 4, 5 packages to find what belongs together. And this is actually against whatever I learned in the university or in the books. This is actually, I don't know why, this is Java unique. Even Angular with the CLI will create a package with corresponding classes. Okay? So that you need CLI for that is a different story, but at least you get a package with corresponding classes. And one test, which is never implemented, is also another story. And the spec test, which is never implemented, is usually the reason why people like Angular in order to test. But if they get Angular, they never test. So this is what I see, which is interesting. So, questions? Now, so what it means is, in projects, you get a constant renaming of packages, and you have to spend time to name your classes correctly. Now, we have the boundary. What else? What we also have is control on entity. And how this works is, entity is your persistence. So if you have one table, you usually get one JPA entity, or one index in Elasticsearch. You can also get one entity, or not, because you can end up having JSON object, supported by Java EE 7 out of the box. And in one point of time, the boundaries become too big, where they grow and grow and grow and grow, and then you have to recognize as a developer then 1,000 lines of code for a class is too much. And then you are introducing controls. And control is just a POJO Java class with some additional behavior. And what it means is, if I have here the movies, usually what I get is a boundary, the name would be movie catalog. And the movie catalog would be usually an EJB. Why? Because it's faster, stats transaction is monitorable, and there is actually no downside. And then it will return, let's say, movies, return, I don't know what's now in the cinema. So we have now JCON on Javas in the cinema. So we have 2 movies right now. And then, why I split that, I would inject this here. And I always get 2 classes, not 1. And this is also important, movie catalog. Why? Because what usually happens in projects is you won't return here string, you would return a response in one point of time. This is the JAX-RS response, movies, and this will have, for instance, get annotation. And here probably you get here with context headers. Yeah, no. Are they not headers? I thought you can throw out some header or headers. You could inject the headers. The point is the return values. Oh, let's do something else which is more common. Pass. Param is strange here because we have get movies. So I would try to, but you could see, for instance, I don't know, max, list of max, and this would be int page size or something. And this would be query param, not path. But what I'm going with that is you get lots of JAX-RS objects, and if you would like to test that, you will have to mock out the whole JAX-RS stuff, which is really bad. So and therefore, we separate that. This movie catalog contains the business logic, or at least the persistence logic and tell. It's just injected entity manager. So something like this is absolutely allowed. So you can go here and say persistence context entity manager, and you are set, right? But now I can test my code without mocking out all these strange JAX-RS interfaces. So this is the whole point why I get always two classes. And then if this movie catalog class is growing because I need to talk to Elasticsearch and to database, for instance, Elasticsearch for full text search, what I would do, introduce a control for full text search. Is just a Java class, and then I will create the control package. And this works something wrong in projects because architects love delayering. They say you always have to have boundary control entity, and what happens then? Most of the boundaries are empty because they just delegate to controls. There's nothing else to do. Okay, my time is over. So what I can tell you is focus on business logic. Forgot the Java EE infrastructure. The best Java EE project is just PostGIS with add inject, nothing else. It's surprisingly simple. And with microprofile, in what you saw with Java 8, what you know is you don't have to do it at the beginning, you know, to learn all the patterns. You can do it if they are required. You have to only know what's inside. Okay, my time is over. Questions? Still no question? Yeah?
So you said you don't want to have any dependencies on other jar files. What about transfer objects?
Yeah, data transfer object. If you have JSON object, there are no data transfer object. How this would work is, what I usually get is JCON in JCON system test. And system test tests the object, the project from outside. And the system test contains JAX-RS client. And what I do then, I donate the other project, my system tests, and they just copy the code and they have the client. This is very pragmatic. So we don't try even to share the details. Why? Because what usually happens, the movies could have length and I don't know what, you know, Altersfreigabe or whatever is in the movie, but the ticket service just would like to have the title. And therefore, I don't try to donate the whole movie DTO. This is unnecessary coupling, really, between wars. I would expect from the ticket department to create a movie DTO or entity with just the title. And the pattern is called bounded context. This old pattern, yeah. Yeah, we could talk about that, but it's unusual just to have the boundary. Most of my projects have boundary and entity, and therefore it's more consistent. But I would allow that. But the problem is, I think, conventional over configuration. I will leave it this way. But you could do this if this is the last optimization, do it, right? But you would have boundary on entity usual, and controls are not that usual. And why I introduce the packages at all is because I think it's nice if you open the boundary, you see what the system can provide to the outside world. And in code reviews, it's really easy to review the project. But if you don't have the structure, you know where to look at. You know, you have to scan all the code to identify the business logic, and you don't see the flow. And you don't see the flow from boundary. For me, what's nice is, by accident, the sorting works. Boundary, control, entity. You know, you can follow from the beginning to the end, and you see how the request flows. Okay. So thank you. Enjoy deleting code and infrastructure. Keep your project boring, thin, and your clients will be happy. Okay. Thank you, and enjoy JCON.